Hey everybody, can you hear me? Hopefully.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I guess I can just get right into to my talk here about planting for pollinators. I've got a PowerPoint set up here. Feel free to ask questions in the chat as I go along. I cover kind of a lot of information throughout the whole presentation, kind of varying topics. So I kind of try to cruise through. You can save questions for the end if they're really specific to your project site, but if it's kind of a question about the particular slide I have pulled up, feel free to throw it in the chat and I'll try to keep an eye out for it. I'm going to share my screen here to PowerPoint. Just give me 1 second. All right. All right, let's see here. I actually can't see the chat while I'm presenting, so if somebody wants to shout out and ask questions out loud, that would work for me. So my name is Bree, but I'm Bree Bauerly. I'm with Minnesota Native Landscapes. We do large scale to small scale projects on basically every ecosystem native to Minnesota, specializing in prairies, wetlands, woodlands, lake shores, rain gardens. We do pollinator friendly solar. We do grazing of sheep and goats. We do have a large fire operation doing wildland fire suppression and prescribed burning. And then we also grow our own native plants and seed on over 600 acres of seed production. We have 6 greenhouses located up towards St. Cloud or in Foley, Minnesota, where we grow plants for our own projects and for sale. And we grow a couple hundred unique species between seed and plants. So it's a lot of fun. Every part of the growing season's a little bit different, and we're always getting to do something new. And it's kind of a really fast growing world of different types of projects. So it's been really exciting. I've been here almost 13 years now, so pretty exciting. Use of native plants in Minnesota has grown in popularity, kind of in backyard settings and beyond over the last 10, 20 years. We've been using these species on, larger scale restoration, like CRP or conservation projects on the county and other state levels with like some habitat improvement lands and different SNAs or WMAs or different pieces of state land parcels, and it's becoming more and more popular to put it right in your own backyard. So we're just doing ecological restoration on many different scales using plants that are indigenous to this region. That means they're hardy for our local unique growing conditions here in Minnesota. So they can withstand our winter weather very well. They can withstand these weird springs, like up north, we just received a bunch of snow after the growing season has already begun. The native plants are really hardy to that. So that's one really great reason to incorporate them in your yard is you don't have to worry about them dying off quite so much with some of these strange winters or strange growing years that we've had over the past few years. MNL's mission is to restore 10 million acres by the year 2030, and we do that by our own projects and projects that we have out there, boots on the ground, or just positively impacting through the sale of native seed or plants, or with our mission partners. That's a really lofty goal, but we're doing our best to do our part to heal the earth with the use of native vegetation and restoring native ecosystems. This is a picture that you might be used to looking out your back window. Like turf lawn is very common in yards in Minnesota, in the United States, and all across the world. In fact, it didn't even really originate here in the United States. We brought it over because we liked the way that it looked. Sort of started as a status symbol to have this really clean green lawn. And for us, the purposes are mainly aesthetic, but we do use some lawn for recreational opportunities. So whenever we're talking about alternatives to lawns, it doesn't typically count things like baseball fields or soccer fields, or some of those high use, high traffic areas. Those are really pretty well suited for some of our high impact turf grasses that we've brought in and brought over and tried out. But those are really high maintenance. So, we're talking about different ways to consider or reconsider the lawn. Another really important use of turf grass is line of sight along roadways and around utility boxes and things like that. So those are important places to keep short statured vegetation and to probably kind of maintain as turf. But there are alternatives. So I'll talk about those in a minute here, and not to go on too long about lawns, but a lot of people don't realize how much lawn there is in America. It's actually the single largest irrigated crop in America. So it even beats out corn as far as being a large irrigated crop. And we also use a really large amount of fertilizers, pesticides, and water. And most of the fresh water is wasted, because sprinkler systems get set up, but and this happens so much on like corporate campuses or places that it's not being tended every day. Sometimes it's in the backyard. You have your sprinkler system set up and it gets knocked in one way or another, or maybe the timing is all off. Maybe you're watering during the middle of the day, and a lot of that is being lost to evaporation. Or maybe you're watering on days that it's already raining and things like that, things that sprinkler systems just weren't made to be smart for. But there's actually some really great new tools that can help us with that as well. So we don't have to get rid of all turf. We don't have to get rid of watering the turf, but we might consider some changes. There are some really cool initiatives in studying turf and courses of action. The U of M has some really great programs studying turf alternatives. But I grabbed some information that I just love from the Lawn Care Center at Purdue, where they suggest these two courses of action, the evolutionary and the revolutionary approach. The evolutionary approach is dealing with the lawn you have, and that could be in conjunction with native plantings. Maybe you're just shrinking that square footage of the lawn. And while you do that, maybe you're going to incorporate some of these other methods like organic fertilizers, electric mowers, setting up a smart watering system. It's really just like an attachment that goes to your sprinkler system. And it does things like sense rain events or sense soil moisture. Or, you could simply set up a watering schedule, things like that, that can kind of help reduce that water use. And then the bottom left corner is my favorite. I always like to mention. It's a robot lawnmower, and as like solar energy becomes much more common here in Minnesota, or even rooftop energy on homes, you could do something like this where you have solar that's powering your house, and then it's powering your lawnmower. And my neighbor has one of these, and it goes like all day and all night. On the sunnier day, the better. That lawnmower is just working away so hard, just kind of going back and forth. You set up boundaries. It works the same as the robot vacuum does, really. Just clipping the yard, and it looks pretty good. So that's just the evolutionary approach, just changing the way that we think about lawn care. But the revolutionary approach is a lot more exciting, I think. So there's a few different things I'll talk about with that. It is mostly going to be about native landscaping, or landscaping with use of native plants or plants that are indigenous to Minnesota or have been here pre-settlement. They're adapted to our local growing conditions, so they don't really need a lot of water or fertilizer or pesticides. So they're really great in that aspect. As far as changing turf lawns with something, that last slide said interseeding with clover, but you could go all the way. In Minnesota, we have a lot of resources for bee lawns, bee lawn information, and bee lawn availability. It's one of the things that we started selling on our website a few years ago, and it's grown in popularity ever since, which is really cool. And there's two ways you can put in a bee lawn, which is essentially a low-grow alternative to turf grass called the fescue blend. It looks kind of similar to turf. It's shown mostly in the picture on the bottom. It's like a finely bladed turf look-alike. It's a little bit longer, a little bit shaggier. It doesn't send up the seed heads like the same as turf grass, so you don't really get that portion where you kind of have to mow to cut those seed heads off. It just kind of flops over. It has a meadow look if you never mow it. But most people do mow it, and they just mow it higher. So always mow at 4 inches instead of 3 or 3.5, and mow less often, because as a drought tolerant, shade tolerant, slightly deeper rooted plant, it actually grows a little bit slower. So it kind of puts its resources in slower growth rather than like Kentucky bluegrass, which tends to grow a little bit faster. So even the fescue blend that's in the bee lawn grows during those hot, dry parts of the summer when turfgrass can kind of start to go dormant because it's so hot. So what makes it a bee lawn is that combination of those fine fescues and 3 types of flowers. And these flowers are not necessarily native to Minnesota, although self-heal is native to Minnesota. That's the picture on the top. But it's Dutch white clover, which is photo on the bottom, self-heal, and creeping thyme. And they all kind of have their own preferences for where they like to grow. So in a bee lawn, you know, if you overseed 1,000 square feet of your yard, for example, you may have the area along the road or the driveway, you might see quite a bit of creeping thyme, because that's kind of like, it likes more of a hot, dry climate. And the self-heal might like, you know, dry, sunny, or dry with a little bit of shade. So maybe you have more self-heal in the shade. And then the Dutch white clover is just a very easy growing plant. And the nice thing about all 3 of these flowers is, unlike dandelions, they don't like spread those like fluffy seeds that blow around. They don't seed like that. So it really shouldn't be too much of a worry to your neighbors if you have flowering plants in your lawn, because they grow by animals dispersing their seed, or maybe the seed kind of just dropping, or the patch, like you've probably all seen clover patches, where they just kind of increase over time. But they are nice because they're green, kind of much longer through the growing season. And another nice thing about the flowers in the lawn is that it can actually feed the critters. If you already have rabbits and deer visiting your garden, and maybe they're putting a lot of pressure on your tulips or on any of your traditional perennials, well, rabbits love clover. And so, you know, before they even get there, they're going to find this buffet of greens that they may prefer to chew on, rather than make it all the way to your garden or near your home. So they can actually provide an unknown benefit by feeding some of those animals and keeping them out of your garden. So I touched on, so it's decreased maintenance, less mowing. You know, if you start from scratch, you may never have to mow it, but if you interseed your existing lawn, you're just going to be mowing less often. But really want to spend the bulk of the time talking about native plantings. So in Minnesota, we have just hundreds of plants that are native to our local climate. So that means that they're really hardy. They overwinter well here. There's drought tolerant plants and shade tolerant plants and moisture tolerant plants for along a shoreline or in a rain garden. And there's plants that bloom early and plants that bloom all the way into the fall, and just so many to choose from. That we're really lucky, and we, you know, we're lucky to look at them and have them in our yard just to look at, but there's also all of these amazing benefits that native plants can provide. So even on a small scale, we can talk about erosion and water quality benefits. Even, you know, a lot of people have spots in their yard that are kind of problem areas, and those could be areas that we're losing some topsoil due to runoff, or maybe it's along a road or a driveway where there's a lot of salt. And so native plants might be a good option for there, or a low-lying area that just gets a lot of moisture and the turf has died off, or maybe it's a shaded spot under a maple tree where you can't get your grass to grow. Those could all be spots that you could consider planting deep-rooted native plants to help anchor that topsoil. If you have some sloped areas, that's also a great spot for natives. It can be really hard to push a lawnmower up and down a hill, and a lot of times you kind of damage the soil while doing that. But native plants require a lot less maintenance and have these root systems that are so extensive that they can just stabilize soil so well. They're also mostly fibrous roots. There's some tap roots, but not damaging like tree or shrub roots. So you can even put native plants right up along your house without much worry. But just to touch on water quality benefits quickly too, you know, one of the most common uses of native plants in a yard, you know, outside of just a perennial garden or a small pocket prairie patch would be installation of a rain garden, whether it's just planting native plants in a low spot or catching water from your downspout. It's a really popular place to put a rain garden. And you know, if you have kind of one of those weird wet areas in your yard, you could easily kind of dig down and add some rain garden plants and fix probably like a problem that you've been having for years. But so anyway, these roots, they grow pretty quickly. And one of the things about native plants is that they're kind of well known for establishing a little bit slowly. So if you're considering starting a native planting from seed, you just have to be prepared to be a little bit patient the first year. They can take quite a while to get going and maybe not quite like you're used to. So get a lot of questions about somebody being worried that their seed mix didn't work. And that's very common. They're working so hard on putting these deep, extensive roots down that they work secondarily on the above ground growth. So a lot of times we'll seed a native or send native seed with a cover crop for that first year growth to really start establishing some above ground growth for weed competition and some green, so you're not so you can be kind of confident about where you spread the seeds and that there's something growing. And there's nothing wrong with the project area, but the plants in the picture on the right, those have been growing only about 2 years. So those were native plant plugs put into two 55-gallon drums that were welded together. And that's just 2 years of soil or of root growth. So it's just really extensive. And you can see why those are so good at filtering groundwater and stabilizing the soil. But the most exciting benefits about planting natives is the benefits to wildlife. So especially pollinators and songbirds and things that you might like to attract to your yard. So whether it's monarch butterflies or if it is hummingbirds or other kinds of birds, we can kind of pick and choose what native plants you might consider based on your preferences or criteria, and that's really exciting. So I'm going to go through some ideas for how to do that, but just knowing that you can provide these benefits for different kinds of wildlife might get you thinking on somewhere in your yard that you could set up a little small prairie planting. Pollinators have started getting a lot more recognition than they ever used to. So maybe even in the last 5 or 6 years or so, we start to hear more and more about how to plant for pollinators and more than just traditional garden plants that we have used for years, but maybe more about native plants and the benefits that they can provide, because native plants and pollinators have lived here together for forever, and they kind of co-evolve to each other's benefits. So when native pollinators are waking up from hibernation or returning to Minnesota from migration, like the monarch and their very long journey from Mexico, when they get here or when they wake up, we have native plants that have just this really nutritious nectar and pollen resources. And so that's just a really great early season resource. And then we have native plants that bloom all through the summer and then into the fall, where it's kind of the opposite. Nectar and pollen resources that are highly nutritious for pollinators that are getting ready to migrate or getting ready to hibernate. And then conversely, the native plants rely on pollinators for their seed production. And so without those pollinators, we wouldn't have seeds to grow new flowers or new plants. So just really important kind of parallels there. When we want to think about providing all those benefits to pollinators, it's kind of considering these different types of plants. And yeah, I missed it here on this slide. I don't want to go too fast here. Especially, for butterflies, and monarch butterflies are really great, like charismatic species to represent pollinators because people remember them from when they're young, or their kids get excited when they see them. And you can do really specific things to attract monarchs to your yard or to make your yard beneficial to monarchs. And it's increasing 3 types of plants that you have on your property. The host plants, nectar plants, and habitat plants I have listed kind of at the top here on the slide. Host plants are like the native bunch grasses that help hold the flowers upright. And nectar plants are all of those species that are blooming through the spring, summer, and fall time, providing those nectar resources. And then, I'm sorry, I mixed it up. Host plants are for the monarch butterfly, for example, is milkweed species. So we have a bunch of different milkweed species that are native to Minnesota, not just the ones that you see on the farm field edges or in the ditches, which is common milkweed. And you can plant that in your yard and it works out great. But there's also butterfly milkweed, and there's poke milkweed, which is shade tolerant, and there's showy milkweed, which has a pretty flower, and there's marsh milkweed, which is also really lovely. It just requires like slightly more of a moist soil. Those are host plants for the monarch butterfly. And there's different host plants for other native butterflies in different families. But then habitat plants are the bunch grasses that help hold the flowers upright. And so those are just kind of 3 considerations, and part of why when we talk about incorporating native plants to your property, we'd like to talk about using a whole variety of different species, and not just 1 or 2 different types of plant, but really you can do the most good by incorporating lots of different kinds of plants. And you can do this on any scale. So any scale that you have in your yard, whether it's 50 square feet to put a 36 plant kit, 50 square feet isn't not too big, 5 by 10, or however large of an area you can spare, all the way up to 1,000 square feet or more, and you can do a nice native seeding with a nice diverse seed mix, or beyond. We're seeing lots of different size and different scales going into all different kinds of property. This particular site was the homeowner was having a challenge. Actually, this is a cabin. This is a shaded hillside with pine and oak shade pressure, and it's also a hillside that is not desirable for this homeowner to be mowing or maintaining turf grass at a really high maintenance level. So took that out, put in, this happens to be planted with live plants rather than seeded. It was done somewhat intentionally with kind of waves of sedges intermixed with wildflowers, and that will stay like that for a few years. But over time, natives, they self-seed, and that's one of the great things. They're perennial plants for the vast majority, meaning they're going to come back year after year. And on the years that those plants are dying out from old age, they will have been replaced by self-seeding, by those seed resources that we were allowing to take root in the planting area. And so, challenges here with a shaded site, there's so many native plants that are really well adapted for the shade. So that's just, a great opportunity to increase the diversity on this particular property. And this is a larger site where somebody converted almost their entire yard to natives, with the exception of like a small walking space around the home. But it's a very diverse, like mesic prairie mix. So it's actually got tall grasses and kind of a mix of heights of wildflowers. There's actually in this particular planting cup plant, which is taller than I am, at over 6 feet tall. Well, not me, the plant is over 6 feet tall. And and the grasses can get that tall in the fall time too, but we also, we've taken, different customer feedback in mind over the years and created, different types of seed mixes with shorter statured plants, or different bloom times and things like that, to create these really fun mixes that might, be perfect for any one particular person. In this case, the mix of heights is really interesting and really exciting. And I know there's always a ton of birds visiting this particular site. The majority of the purple flowers in the photo are bee balm, or the native wild monarda flowers, and those are just attracting so many different types of butterflies and hummingbirds and bees, and then another, quite a bit of diversity through the rest of the growing season. Shorelines are an awesome spot to plant native plants. They do a great job of stabilizing the bank that turf just can't do. Turf grass or like yard grass, Kentucky bluegrass, that has only like a 3-inch root system. So it doesn't do anything for stabilizing banks. And when you have ice pressure and wave pressure and things, banks will move quite a bit and they can become degraded, and then you actually lose some of your yard space. But incorporating natives into areas with moist soils, you can plant cardinal flower, which is a highly sought after wildflower, and Joe Pye weed and prairie blazing star, along with some really cool sedges, and homeowners get kind of a bad taste about sedges, but because we're used to having to deal with creeping or yellow nut sedge in your yard, but the native sedges aren't like that at all. So little disclaimer, because we use a lot of native sedges in our woods, woodland mixes and savanna mixes, and shoreline kits and things, and they're just really great, pretty short statured, nice to look at plants that don't really creep or spread like that does. But just some cool variety, cool diversity, great for wildlife. And a cool thing about planting natives on a shoreline is it's beneficial for wildlife like ducks or geese, but they grow tall. And if you've ever been to like a city park or something where there's turf all the way up to pond edges, you almost always have geese everywhere. And what comes along with geese being everywhere. But when you plant natives along shorelines, they actually don't like stepping over them. So you can actually reduce the number of birds, waterfowl up on the turf lawn. So that's kind of an added benefit that people don't really talk about. And a lot of the shoreline species are also really good for rain gardens. You can get a lot of these similar plants like cardinal flower and Joe Pye weed that work well in rain gardens. So back, about the planting for pollinators or planting for monarchs, there's certain standards that when we're talking about pollinator mixes or plant kits or providing benefits to pollinators, certain things that we want to cover, and that's usually attribute, or it creates season-long color. So we're wanting to add more things that are blooming in the spring, more things blooming in the summer, more things blooming in the fall time to create that season-long nectar and pollen resource for the pollinators. But for us, it provides season-long color. So aesthetically, it's really nice to look at when we're dealing with pollinator mixes. They have the highest concentration of flowers of any native seed mix. And that's no matter where you get the seed mix from. If it's a native pollinator mix, it means that it has a high concentration of flowers to grass ratio. And then it also has just a lot of different blooms to create more blooms throughout the entire growing season in the spring, the summer, and the fall. And especially in Minnesota, we have a lot of cool spring blooming trees and shrubs that are native, and we can incorporate more. There's a lot of beautiful flowering native shrubs and trees. And then but the most important, I think, fall is the fall nectar resources and for pollinators, and that's the asters and the goldenrods. And it's not the goldenrods that you might see in the ditches a lot, the Canada goldenrod, the one that spreads pretty easily. These goldenrods are better behaved, and they're really pretty. There's a variety of them, from gray goldenrod, which only gets maybe 18 inches tall, to stiff goldenrod, which kind of stands on its own and stays up all winter for a really cool winter interest, but also providing like seeds for birds in the winter time. And I'll get to that slide next, but just a shot of what's in our pollinator mix on the left screen here is it varies between like 38 or 37 and 38 species of flowers. So that's a lot of different flowers in one seed mix. So you can kind of get a good idea of how there would be season-long color. A lot of the species are summer bloomers, but summer is, I'll say long in Minnesota, but we all think it feels too short. But we have kind of we're assuming by the flowering standards, we're talking like June, July, and August that we have all these different blooms, so we can really spread the bloom times out. And these are primarily like white, yellow, pink to purple to kind of bluish color. There's not a lot of red native flowers. In fact, if you see like the red bee balm, that's usually like a cultivar or is created for that red color, because bees don't actually really see the color red, not like some other animals do. So they don't prefer the red by any means, and that's that lavender color flower that I showed in a few slides ago. That's again the native version, kind of comes in that purple color. But anyway, so there's natives kind of in all those different colors, but I always get people asking me for more red, and there just isn't much for red other than a handful of species. Anyway, if planting for pollinators isn't necessarily your idea of what you want to draw into your yard, maybe consider planting for songbirds, and this we can do as well. So we just choose species that are known to attract birds for a variety of reasons. So it might be because it produces a seed that the birds enjoy eating, or it might be because it attracts insects that a bird enjoys eating. And so, regardless of that reason, we can base this whole list of species that are native to Minnesota that we know birds will visit, and create a whole diverse seed mix based off of that. And so that's really cool to do, and it's really kind of fun to see what kinds of new birds you might get from your all natural bird seed that you're growing in your own yard. And you don't have to harvest it. You just leave it standing through the fall and winter, and the birds will find it and eat the seeds. We based our mixes off of this tool put out by the Audubon Society, and you can go to this website and you put in it's audubon.org, and then you go to native plants for birds. I think it's right there on the homepage, but you just enter your email and your zip code, and you'll get a custom list of native species. And they're going to overlap quite a bit with these ones that we put into our mix, because these are plants that are native to Minnesota that provide benefits to birds. But the cool thing about going onto the Audubon's website is that you can see which types of birds are attracted to different kinds of plants. And you can put in different categories. These are for like herbaceous plants here, but there are filters for like trees and shrubs as well. So even if you know what kinds of trees you have on your property, you can see what kinds of birds might be attracted to the seeds or nuts of those species. But here you can see kind of on the right side, the right column, are the different resources so that the plants are plants are providing. So whether it's seed or it's attracting certain insects, or it's a host plant for butterflies, and then the birds are coming, to visit, to maybe eat those insects. But it's kind of all in the circle of how it works. But anyway, rain gardens, again, I mentioned briefly, but they are a great way to incorporate native plants in your yard, especially when you have problem areas. This is at a zoo in central Minnesota, and here they just had a really hard time maintaining this turf lawn, and I think it was always kind of mucky. And there's a culvert here that feeds out from under the giraffe exhibit. And so it was as simple as turning over, tilling up and getting rid of the turf lawn. And this was all plugged with live plants, but you can see it's got a really cool variety of here. The great blue lobelia and cardinal flower are really standing out in this picture, with the asters about to bloom for the later summer or fall time. So it's kind of cool centerpiece here of the walking path at this particular location, with a nice diversity of native plants rather than a poorly performing large lawn space. So a really large number of inquiries that I get are because somebody has a shaded property or a woods, and sometimes it's already been degraded with buckthorn, or kind of have problem areas with some woody invasive species, and that's okay. A lot of people deal with that problem, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel. If you get started on a buckthorn project, don't stop. We can replace the buckthorn with better things, whether it be a native seed mix or slowly introducing cool native understory species. These are some of our earliest blooming plants. So, you know, we've had some weird weather over the last few weeks where things have gotten really cold at night still and warm during the day. And we've had a lot of insects out and they need, you know, resources. And so some of these early bloomers like Jack in the Pulpit or Trillium, which those Trillium were dug up with a permit because you can only dig Trillium and many other species, but they are one of the rare species that you can only dig with a permit. That we were lucky to grow them for a few years after collecting from a site. But these species are amazing resources for our pollinators that are waking up. And a lot of times they're overwintering in the woods in that leaf layer because we're so used to manicuring our lawns and removing the leaves from the lawns in the fall time that that they seek refuge in the woods where there are leaf layers for them to nest in over the winter. And so having those spring ephemerals or spring blooming plants are really cool. But that's, you know, that's not where the woodland plants end. They go all the way, you know, through the growing season, just like prairie flowers do, to something like this aster here. I think it might be calico aster. It's like a white aster that can kind of range from part shade to shade and even some sun, I think. So, or, you know, you could go with a native seed mix and seed your understory to kind of more of a wild look and pretty low maintenance that can help outcompete the buckthorn or kind of help establish some cover while you're managing the re-sprouts. And there's some really cool woodland flowers that kind of you might have seen before. The brown-eyed Susan looks pretty similar to black-eyed Susan, except for it's taller, and there's many more flowers per plant, and it's longer lived. Black-eyed Susan is like a biennial in Minnesota. The brown-eyed Susan is a longer lived perennial, but it does get a little bit taller and it likes the shade, which is great if you have a shaded property. The anise hyssop, that is a nice kind of woodland edge plant, purple flower, really lovely, and it has the best smelling leaves, well, unless you hate black licorice, but the leaves smell like black licorice. You can make it into a tea and that sort of thing, so it's kind of got some cool uses. So one of the red flowers that we can do is wild columbine, and these, some people called them honeysuckle back in the day because you can bite the tops off and they're kind of sweet. This is a native plant, and there are garden varieties, but I will say I think in my experience the native version does the best, you know, consistently. It doesn't just all of a sudden decide not to grow one year. So this is actually a shade tolerant plant, but it can range into some sun as well. And that can be the case for a lot of native woodland species. If they get the right amount of soil moisture, they can range into sunnier planting areas. But then we have like the powerhouse woodland plant, the large leaf aster, that can just grow in the pretty dense shade. And it's a nice plant because when you have dense shade, you might not have a lot of things that do want to grow. And this is one of them that should do fine in most shaded places in Minnesota. So we realized, you know, we can talk about planting native plants or native seed mixes in anybody's yard, and some gardeners might get really inspired to plant some natives in their existing perennial beds, or to totally till up and convert a 500 square foot area of their yard or their whole front yard or boulevard into a prairie planting. But somebody who maybe doesn't have as big of a yard or doesn't know where to start. Our greenhouse manager a couple of years ago came up with this idea for My Pocket Prairie. And what it is I'm going to show a video of what it is, but first I'm going to show like kind of the inspiration video. So I think it's really cool. Kind of just shows the history of prairies in general in Minnesota, and then kind of the changes that they went through, and then kind of some inspiration for these initiatives to bring it back. So I'll just show a couple of short videos here. start over. Okay. Oops. So yeah, that was kind of like the inspiration behind it. Prairies disappeared, and we can bring them back on certain scales. And there's some really great funding and initiatives for some larger plots of land, putting back prairie and converting, marginal farmland and things like that. But maybe you're a novice gardener, or maybe you think it might be a cool gift for somebody, but we just think that everybody could start with native plantings, and when you don't know where to start, we thought we'd try to help out. This kit, it kind of we made it so it comes with everything that you need. This is like a short intro video. It goes up at your door. Paint by number garden. So it's kind of fun. It comes with the pre-made layout and the plants, and it just makes it a really great little project. Maybe great for kids or wherever. Otherwise, like how to get started and where to start. Luckily, these resources are growing, and there's more and more, availability to find native plants. The kits that are shown in the top left photo, those are kits that we made that are sold in Fleet Farm, like the pop-up greenhouses, or online is a great spot. If you go to a garden center, consider finding true natives if you can, for a prairie planting, if you're starting with plants versus seed. The natives will have, a scientific name and a common name, but never like a, in quotes, like a fancy name. Like a purple coneflower won't have like Magnus or white swan or like any of those names. Native plants don't have those. Those are the cultivars, which are fine for a garden. They don't always have like those deep-rooted benefits. They don't have the same, not the same benefits to pollinators. And there's a lot of research going on about that. There's some cool native plant sales. The Lawns to Legumes program, which has just completed its final round of funding, is actually on the table for receiving more funding, and maybe even quite a bit more, which is just a great way to help homeowners who want to plant natives directly through funding those projects. And there you just have to kind of go with one of the local origin native plant or native seed vendors in Minnesota, and get some seed and some plants, and there's different categories like bee lawns or pollinator pocket plantings, and trees and shrubs in different parts of the program. So because it seems very encouraging that there should be more funding for that, that's something that could potentially help fund a little pollinator planting for your yard. There's other options in the community. You could get involved. If you maybe work in an office building, maybe you could convince your office, the building owner, to convert part of the turf grass to pollinator prairie. We did that with Carol Evan a couple of years ago. The meteorologist Laura Becker, who loves native plants, convinced her supervisors or whoever to plant a prairie, and now we have the Care 11 front yard prairie that M&L seeded in our pollinator mix a couple of years ago, and so we're having fun watching that grow. Schoolyard gardens, unused park open space, maybe area under some trees or off to the side or near the parking lots where the salt kills the turf grass. Or maybe the best you can do is like a small patio space. Then you can try large planter pots. They don't do great in small planter pots, but you can get a native plant kit and spread it out between a couple of large plant pots, and then just pull them up closer to the house over the winter, and you could probably get away with that. Or simple as enhancing your existing perennial beds. Native plant plugs typically come in a 2x2 by 3 inch plant plug, and then they grow bigger over time. We always say it's kind of a waste of money to buy like a 1 gallon native plant because they'll grow, quickly once you get them in the ground if you just start with the small plugs. And enhance your perennial beds with some of your favorite native plant species, and it's kind of fun to research what you might want to put in your yard. Okay, so I'll take some questions now. I do want to point out my email address here on the right side of the page, and a code if you guys want to check out our online store at all for native seed mixes or even plant kits. You can use my code TurfTalk10. But write down my email address if you might want to ask any questions. Or I also spend the weekdays on our website chat. So if you ever have questions when you're and you think of our website, mnnativelandscapes.com, you can find me on there too. Okay, a question in the chat. What is the best way to prep yard soil for native transplants? So that's a great question. There are different ways to convert your yard to natives based on your preferences and based on what's currently growing there. If it's Kentucky bluegrass or like lawn grass, it's going to be the easiest to convert. And then it also depends on what you're putting it into. So if you're going from turf grass to a native prairie seeding area, you can till it up. You can smother it for growing season where you put something over it, something dark and either heavy or dark and plastic that's stapled down. Put it down for at least a month of the hot part of the growing season. Really kill back what's underneath there. Pull it back, rake up the soil and try to promote another flush of growth, and then cover it again for another month or so. And then you would plan on doing like a fall seeding at that time. You could use like a kind of a heavier duty tiller and till up the turf, especially that works in like kind of a poor lawn, like not if it's super lush and super thick. If you have a really thick sod layer, it might be hard to till through it. The Xerxes Society, that's a nonprofit for pollinator conservation. They have some really great tools or recommendations for ways to prepare for native planting, and a lot of them are organic methods. They do mention, if you're okay with using herbicides, that it can be a good method for conversion, especially if you're starting with reed canary grass or smooth brome or something that's like a perennial with slightly deeper roots, that you may, benefit from a little herbicide input on the front end to the conversion for the long term. So that's a method too, but it just depends on what you're starting with as far as how to prepare the soil. But there's some good methods, and typically you just want to do it really thoroughly to begin with. That's if you're converting to a seeding. If you're going to start with plants, then you can do a couple of different things that are a little similar to those first steps. You could start by tilling up the grass that's there or smothering it. And if you smother it, you can do the cardboard method where you lay down layers of cardboard or cardboard with compost on top, and let that break down, and then you can plant into it. Or you can do the newspaper method where you do a layer of newspaper, a layer of compost, and a layer of newspaper, a layer of compost, and let that sit for a while and then plant into it. The My Pocket Prairie video showed that kind of mat that rolled out that had like the numbers painted on it. Well, we do that special for the My Pocket Prairie, but we also do have rolls of that material in a 5 foot by 50 foot. And that is called a weed suppressant mat. And it doesn't work with our native seed, but it does work with plants. And what that does, it's made in Floodwood, Minnesota, so up north, made of aspen fibers and like byproduct. I think from byproduct from paper maybe, and then like a glue, and you roll it out and staple it down, and you can just staple that down a couple of weeks before you want to plant, and it acts kind of like a natural mulch would, or like a shredded wood mulch would, stays in place for 2 to 3 years, and it just keeps anything else from growing, except for it will let the plant that you cut the hole and plant it into the soil, it'll let that keep growing, but it doesn't allow sunlight to the soil surface for other plants to grow. So that's a really cool kind of new product that works really great for a native planting, and it's really easy to work with. The mat, you can kind of roll it out and score it and cut it, and it covers, well, if it's 5 by 50, 250 square feet per roll, which is a pretty good sized garden space if you're starting with a small native garden. So it's kind of a fun one too. Or like I said, you can start by adding native plants to a existing garden area, or somewhere that doesn't have a bunch of weeds, and just start planting once you decide what you might want. Like I mentioned, there's native plants that are good for all of these different growing conditions, and so we try to make it easy with our plant kits, and I know other people do too, other native plant growers, by having kind of, well, we try to make ours kind of creative. Like we have something called the short and tidy kit, which is one of our most popular kits. I think people tend to put it in the front of their house or something, and those are native plants that behave well in gardens, and they look nice, and they're some of the more popular plants like butterfly milkweed or something. But then we also have like the shade garden kit, which is a spot that a lot of people have a hard time growing any plants. So like a shade garden is kind of exciting to find a plant kit for, or buckthorn replacement. That's just kind of the same as a shade garden, but with more aggressive species. Drainage stream kit we have. So again, if you have something like a rain garden or a ditch or something, something challenging that you have on your property, we probably have a plant kit that might be good for it. So, and if you are a lucky person to apply and get a Lawn Soil Games grant, we do have like a Rusty Patch Bumblebee plant kits, which are designed with a larger diversity of species that are great for supporting Rusty Patch Bumblebee habitat. So that's all I have prepared. If anybody has any other questions, I'll stay on for a few more minutes. Otherwise, I'll hand it back over to the city.
Well, thank you again, Bree. I did want to share that the city is going to be having a pollinator event, and Bree will be joining us for that. It is June 26th from 9 till noon, and it's going to be at City Hall at 1001 Belgrade Avenue. We are actually going to convert a couple spaces right on our lawn. Bree's going to help us with planting. I think we're going to go with a pollinator mix and then the upland mix. And so we'll have 2 separate gardens. That'll be seeded, and then we will ask citizens to help put in plugs too. So should be a fun day of planting. Again, Bree will be there with your truck. So will you have your plant kits with you then, Bree, for sale too, if people are interested?
Yeah, we'll have maybe not pre-designed kits, but what we'll have is 6 packs that you can kind of mix and match, and we can give suggestions on what might work for your particular spot. We'll probably bring some My Pocket Prairies, and I'll try to bring well, maybe just a selection of other things, but we'll be there to help answer questions too, and we'll try to bring as many plants as we can fit in the truck.
Sure, I think it's going to be an awesome event. We're also going to have the Monarch venue come. We have Nicollet County Extension with their 4-H group coming. We'll have master gardeners, and the library will be involved. So it'll be sort of a family event. So we're hoping everybody can come out and join us. Bree, thanks again for your time tonight. Look forward to seeing you on the 26th, if not before. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you.